Hello.
Hey man, what's up?
Not much, Mike. How you been?
I've been good. How are you, Mark?
I've been pretty great. Under the full moon, we had the tent set up in the backyard, so my girlfriend and I were able to sleep under the past 2 nights of the full moon. It was interesting. Very interesting circumstances came up on the full moon, but I'm curious to know how your week's been.
Well, hold on. Before we get to me, let me hear. What are these curious circumstances?
All right, so full moon and new moon, right? When you're setting intentions and getting to know the moon cycle, what you learn is that the new moon is bringing things in, and the full moon is letting things go. Would you say that's kind of what you've heard or what you've learned or experienced?
Yeah, I would say they're the markers of the change, of the direction. Like the new moon is the bottom, and I see the full moon on the top. And so once you hit the full moon, well, then the amount of the moon which is visible begins to reduce. So you can see the energy is starting to reduce. You're letting go, and then from the new moon, you're working up. It's going from total darkness to like building into like the full disk is visible. So in the most literal sense, we see that there's an expansion. So that's why, we would time our intention or anything new or anything which is beginning to grow with that point in the cycle. But yeah, that makes sense.
So in a sort of odd way, I mean, yeah, all of that to me is kind of intuitive. I've always recognized, okay, this is a special time, but it wasn't until recently that, the full moon and the new moon started to become events in my month, right? Where, things would be done on the night that you wouldn't have just done on any ordinary night. So my girlfriend and I would
well, you're bringing consciousness, awareness. That's what consciousness is. You're aware of something which is always there. Like, I mean, you said intuitively, you kind of always kind of sense like the meaning or something like that. But, there's never been a moment that you've been in this body that, the moon hasn't been going through cycles. Like you've been bathed with that in the subconscious your entire life. That's just like part of being, living life on Earth. And so, what you just described in terms of like becoming aware of the cycle, you're just becoming aware of what's always around you. And what I find so interesting and so powerful about recognizing these things that are happening all around us all the time, which we probably ignore, is when you become aware of it, you can begin to coordinate your own internal cycles with that which we're experiencing life within. So definitely, I mean, I think we all got to go through that process unless we have been raised in an environment where that is what was taught.
Right. So in this sort of, haphazard slapdash kind of way, I've been, following these cycles, and my girlfriend, she's definitely more prepared. She takes time to do her meditations or rituals, whereas I'm kind of like, oh, full moon's out, let me run and grab my crystals, let me run and do this real quick, so I'm always like, I feel like I'm a little scatterbrained when it comes to these types of occasions, and this particular evening was no different. And I was getting kind of a lot of computer work done that I'd been procrastinating. I thought, okay, this might be a productive energy sort of practice. This is something I want to keep doing, accomplishing my goals. And the full moon, I want to feel that stress, that stress of like getting that, work stress and transmuting it into productivity and efficiency, right? So long story, I'm going to try to wrap it down a little bit. A longtime friend of mine, okay, really longtime friend. He's somebody who I would say, isn't really up to speed on a lot of the things that we talk about, but he has some sort of awareness of like the spiritual and not necessarily from like a traditional perspective. But he's not the type of guy that would go and listen to a podcast or even like watch a YouTube video. You know, he's very much just like blue pill, if we want to use that term, but aware.
We use that pill or that term. Excuse me. How long do you know? What you said, like a longtime friend. Like so, like when in your life were you? How long have you known him?
Since summer camp when I was in middle school was when we met.
Okay.
So
were you guys close?
So yeah, and he's, you know, a neighborhood friend too, because he lives close by. So we're very close friends, but in a sort of contested kind of way. Like we've always had our clashes, right? Even though we've stayed close in proximity and in friendship, we've had a lot of clashes over our maybe 10 or 12 years of knowing each other now. And you know, one thing.
Let me just interrupt for a second because I just like to throw this stuff out, which comes to my head. So, like in my mind, I would classify that type of relationship or dynamic, which you have with him, is more of like in the literal sense, like a sibling brother, because that's one of the things which is so interesting about those who we have as siblings. Is like, you know, you get to pick your friends, but you don't pick your family. And so a lot of times there can be contention with like, you know, a brother or sister or so forth, but they will be with you to some degree or another throughout your life. But when you have a friend, someone who is in your life and you recognize like there's that kind of like there's a contention which can often happen between siblings, sibling rivalry and so forth. It's like that's a different type of friendship because you have that you have the capability of choosing your friends, yet even though with this contention, you guys are still like drawn to each other. You're still connected. And I would say like that's an indication of a really deep connection. Like whether you want to say that's like, you know, past lives or what have you, I don't know. But like that is rare. Or that is, you know, less common, like when you recognize that. And so I just say that to like kind of put into context in terms of like, you know, maybe the depth of what this friend is for both you to him and him to you.
Yeah. And, you know, as someone who is the oldest of, you know, two kids, my sister and I've never had a familial brother, you know, cousins. I've had a lot of cousins, but they live very far away. So yeah, in a lot of ways, he's like a younger brother to me. And I
all right. I took you off track. So
no, it's okay. So he comes by on the full moon, and it was sort of like planned in a sense because I want to give these psilovitamins that I got from a friend, Megan Cush. It's like a microdosing sort of version of mushrooms to him because I'm like, you know, this guy. He's been calling me a lot lately. He's been, you know, going around in circles, and it just feels like maybe this is the right thing to offer him. So he's super excited. He's like, yeah, oh yeah, definitely. How much, you know? So bring some.
Is he an experienced mushroom taker?
Yeah, he's definitely done, you know, things before. You know, I don't want to go into his history, but he's never done anything that I wouldn't do, I'd imagine, and I've never done anything, you know, in the chemical department. It's strictly natural stuff.
Right.
And I bring this up because I wondered, you know, with the show being, you know, your handbook for the apocalypse and like, you know, what these substances can do to awaken people. I'm like, maybe that wasn't the right choice, you know, to make that so freely available to someone, especially like a guy who kind of goes around in circles a lot. I'm like, you know, I kind of regretted it in the moment. And then sure enough, he calls me the next morning and says, I took 3 of them. They didn't work, you know, complain, blah, blah, blah. So I'm like, you know, I tried to do a good thing. I tried to help out my friend, but it seemed like, you know, something about that, whether it was the full moon energy, whether it was, you know, the microdosing capsules themselves. I mean, I don't want to ask you about that, but, you know, what are your thoughts on that as a component of like this new world we're in and even like people who seem to have, it doesn't have that same effect that it might have had on someone like me or yourself or, you know, the awakening, like it doesn't hit with everybody.
Right. Well, there's a lot going on in what you just described. So my thought, my perspective in what that story you just told. First off is, you didn't go too much into it, but just like, your intention and or motivation in terms of offering him these vitamins. And so it's the first thing which kind of jumped out in my mind was like the second guessing of it. Like, like, oh God, did I do the wrong thing? Did I make a mistake? And just recognizing like that as a behavior. Like sometimes we do like make decisions which were like, wow, I wish I didn't. I wish I would have chosen differently. But then a lot of times, like, our first instinct, our intuitive sense, what we're driven to is like, that's what we want to learn to trust more. And when we don't trust it, or when we second guess it, it is, it's just that it's a second guessing of that level of consciousness. And the reason why you're probably second guessing, that's why we all second guess things, is we hold in our mind like an expectation as to the outcome. So like, maybe you were thinking like, oh, maybe this won't like work out the way I thought it would, or give him the thing he's looking for, or so forth. But the truth of the matter is that's out of your hands. Like that, you're either going to learn to trust your instincts, or you're going to learn not to trust your instincts. And I think that's like kind of like the bigger thing as it relates to that specific scenario is like, this was you seeing yourself, like, this isn't about like what I would have done differently or not so much, but more so like observing like what has happened and then how you internally responded. No. And so this doesn't have anything to do with like changing the outcome as much as it is becoming more aware, more conscious of, oh, this is how I work. And then just by becoming more aware and more conscious, like, the whatever change happens, like that's just part of being human. With that being said, well, go on. Okay.
I just wanted to clarify on the point of intention, because I think this is really the real reason I brought it up. I had this feeling like, oh, here I am, this guy who knows all this stuff, and my little brother friend, because that is the dynamic. He's younger than me, and it is almost like, I'm the big brother in the situation. He's coming here on this special full moon, and I felt like there was some gravity to what we were doing, in a sense. Like, I'm giving him this substance in a way that he could potentially use to alchemize his life, right, in a positive way. So my instincts were telling me to be sort of ceremonial about it, but then at the same time, because there wasn't that understanding, it felt like I was imposing, or even, to take it a step further, being kind of phony, like putting on a character, like, oh, I'm this great, mystic that's gonna give you this, thing. So I felt that theme going on, and I'm like, is this what I'm letting go of on my own personal level while I'm experiencing this full moon? Because it was a Pisces full moon. Dualities going on. We're in Virgo season. That's very much about working and getting down to, the sort of earthiness of the harvest, preparing all the final things that go into that. That's the kind of energy that maybe was a theme in my mind. But yeah, there was that feeling of almost phoniness. Like, am I aggrandizing this whole process? And is that even worth it? Because, what happened, to put a pin in the balloon and pop it real quick, he didn't. It doesn't seem like he had that revelation that I was hoping he would have and reach that point. Because maybe I'm underestimating what he's got going on in his life. Maybe that's not what that's not the magic pill that he needs.
So did he come over specifically to receive those vitamins? Like, was that, or was it just like kind of spontaneous? You're like, hey man, I think I got something you might like.
It was in a way, it was not spontaneous, because he's been calling me. And what's funny is, at the beginning of this summer, with my girlfriend and I kind of transforming our lives for the better, we made the decision to let certain people go in a way, and he's someone who I felt I've already done that before in the past, like said, okay, this relationship's not benefiting me. I need to just put some space between us, boundaries, and when I've done that, it's been a huge benefit. I felt like, oh, okay, wow, I could, really be myself and not, because that tends to happen. You get into ruts with old friends, you pick up your old habits again in a way. And I think, he sees me evolving and has reached out to me a lot over the past few months. And I've had that boundary, and I slowly like let him in closer and closer. And I'm wondering like, oh, was that also the wrong decision? Like letting this person, and it relates to the story that maybe we can get into further, because it's like, are there people in our lives that are not going to wake up to this apocalypse and are going to drain us in that way and anchor us in third dimensional reality when we want to, in a really woo-woo kind of way, I want to ascend to 5D reality. I don't want to be anchored in third dimensional, the old world. But if we keep the friendships with people who aren't going to take that leap with us, is that tethering us to? So that's kind of where I was at. It's like, hey, here's a ticket to join me. And it feels like he missed the boat,
So a couple of things. I want to go back for clarification. Like when he arrived, was it last night or 2 nights ago? 2 nights ago.
So
when he arrived.
I'm sorry, I didn't clarify. So yeah,
Did he specifically know, like knowing before that he was going to receive those vitamins?
Yes,
okay.
he had been bothering me about it all week because...
So bothering about receiving it. It's like, hey, man, let me come by. I want to get that stuff. Like that sort of stuff.
He kind of sniffed the fact out that I had received this as a gift from a past guest on my show. And like I've been just kind of giving him advice here and there, like what to do with his girlfriend, what to do with his job, like things like that, like just, he'll call me with like some negative energy, some negative vibes, and I'll help him turn it around, and he sees the bright side of things and feels better and moves on, and it's exhausting because you can't do that for somebody more than a couple times before they just have to start doing it for themselves, otherwise they're going to take advantage of you energetically.
Well, I think you just nailed it when you're like, you can't do that all the time. They got to take care of it themselves. So it sounds like, particularly in terms of like your expectation on what you thought was going to happen, is, you don't have that responsibility. That's his responsibility, But that being said, I mean, this is what I'm hearing from that story. First is like the fact that you, even if it felt like, quote unquote phony, you had something inside that recognized it. I want this to be a different experience than like a party time. Like, hey, let's just go get fucked up or anything like that. Like
right.
The fact that you are recognizing it, and then you're trying to create an environment, the environment, like, when you're handing it to them or what have you, is like, you're letting them know, like, this is my intention. Like when I'm giving this to you is like, this is not in the intention of just like having a good time to like go and feel different. It's something greater than that. And a lot of times when we try on costumes, people are trying on costumes all the time. I mean, I think that's a great part of being human. There's schools of thought that are like, oh, you want to go and devoid any sort of costume and just be like in the here and now and like no personality. I mean, that's just a choice in terms of a higher path. Another higher path is a consciousness in terms of the costumes you wear. And the lower path is identifying with the costume, thinking like, oh, this is who I am. I am this costume, so I always have to be that. But like at a higher path with the costume wearing is like, you're like, okay, I'm stepping into this role right now. I'm not this role, but in this instance, I can be this role. And so like, that's what I'm kind of hearing you becoming, what I just described to you as a concept, when you put that into play, into your actual life, like, okay, I'm going to bring awareness into stepping into costumes, that could still feel foreign. that could still feel foreign. And when you're describing like, I felt like a phony, I would say that's another way of saying it felt foreign because I'm not used to that. Could also be another way of saying like I'm describing growth. Like, you know, the very first time, like I don't care what religion you are, if you're a rabbi or a priest or what have you, the first time like you are the one who's in front of the pulpit, like that's going to feel weird. And then like 10 years later, like that role becomes like more commonplace for you. So like, you know, there are all these ways of looking at it, but then, so it's like, one, you don't have to take on that responsibility. Two is like, you know, if this is a role which seems to make sense to you, like even greater than outside of just this friend, but recognizing, and you're building this infrastructure in your life. You're building an infrastructure in your life where you're kind of like put in a position like the priest, if you will. And there's nothing like per se wrong with that. Like that's part of the archetypical human experience. Someone who willfully lives like afoot in different worlds, and they can help people reach that other world. Like that's like, you know, you're always that middle person. They've done that. That's a universal thing. And, you know, we happen to live in a time where it's becoming more organic, which means like you're figuring it out yourself as opposed to going to seminary school. So like that's kind of like a path which, you know, you are on. And as you become aware of it, you get to go and decide whether you want to continue down that path or how you want to do it. But, you know, you just want to be easy with yourself and as your life unfolds. So the last point I want to make is like what you actually gave him. Microdoses, like it's not meant to be like a breakthrough moment. You know, I've got like a range of complexities of thoughts as it relates to, you know, all of these types of substances and how they're taken. You know, and what I mean by complexities, like I have a lot of different thoughts on it. But that's generally said. The microdose experience is different than like, you know, a full-on high acute experience. And it can be taken, I would say, in that ceremonial. And all the ceremonial does, or ritualistic way, is it tells your conscious mind, tells your unconscious mind that this is special and this is important, and whatever the event is that you're doing it to. And it kind of like deepens the connection between the conscious and the unconscious. But, you know, the microdose is like one, it's more of like a preparing of the soil, if you will. It's not meant to be this huge sort of breakthrough moment. And I don't know how much I agree with there even existing huge breakthrough moments. That last at least. But the microdose, it like kind of prepares for possibly if someone like follows through with a certain protocol. You know, don't take my advice in terms of what protocol should be, but if one follows through with that, what they're doing is they're working at a foundational level of saying, I want to begin to see reality. I want to begin to perceive reality and change, like on a fundamental level, my consciousness.
Right.
And I think that's probably a healthier way of going through, like, you know, and an easier way of going through any sort of consciousness change. What I'm hearing you describe is very much, it sounds like kind of like a brotherly type, a big brotherly type of role. We're all in uncharted territory right now. And so we're all kind of like figuring out as it goes. And so that also means we're all doing the best that we can. So regardless of what your friend said, I think he also had the wrong expectation. If he was trying to, you know, if he's like, I didn't feel anything, well, you know, that's not really what it's about. But if that is like, you can feel things on a microdose level, but it's subtle. And so that also requires an amount of ability to go inside and notice subtle changes in like feelings, emotions, and thoughts.
Well, I should clarify, his intention wasn't to microdose. It was to use what was intended to be microdosed in a macrodose fashion. So maybe that was also inherently the problem, you know.
Maybe that is the case, and maybe this is I mean, this is what I've experienced in my own personal life. Not so much like, well, actually, no. So I don't do like mushrooms or entheogens or psychedelics on a regular basis. That's not part of my life or my practice. But I've certainly have experiences, and every time an opportunity has kind of like presented itself, it's been special, I guess. Like special meaning like different from like when that opportunity does not present itself. And I subscribe, like I fully embrace this idea of like, if you really see these as like plant medicines and so forth, is, it'll call you when the time is right. I have seen that in my life time and time again for the few experiences which I've had. And so if that's a logic which at least makes sense to me, I would say like, maybe now is not the time for your friend, despite the fact that he wants it. Like it's going to show itself when it shows itself. And so maybe this is what showed itself right now.
Yeah. And, like I said, I don't think he's ever going to listen to this. Maybe he will now that we talked about him so much. But, for someone in my position where it's like, is a friendship like this holding me back, and like, as we proceed forward into this very strange time where things are rapidly changing, it seems, are these blue-pilled friends gonna hold us back? I mean, that's something I've been wondering, because hence the title of my show, My Family Thinks I'm Crazy. It could equally be called My Friends Think I'm Crazy in a lot of cases, because the people I grew up with don't really understand a lot of the things that I like to read, talk, and think about.
Right. I mean, I suppose only time will tell, right? I mean, that's a choice. I think that's a choice. Again, like being conscious is like, I'm aware of this situation, and you might not necessarily, it might not be as easy as saying like, I choose to go this way and that way. Maybe sometimes you do. I'm choosing right now to cut someone out of my life, but maybe there's certain people who you're not quite ready to make that call upon. But being aware of that, at least it brings like a deeper level into your unfolding. And then I'll introduce two different ideas, or like, I'll contrast two different ideas. Like you said, one, which is are people who see things in a very, very different way, or have a very, very different reality or inner world than what you have. Like, are they tethering you to something which you are growing away from? That's a concept, that's a reality, that's a path, that's an approach. And then you also go like, I can't think of what it's called, but I've always, this idea always sticks in my mind as at least just a contrast point. I think it's Buddhism, but within one of the ideas within Buddhism is, not leaving your earthly brothers and sisters until every last person has enlightenment. And so that like kind of introduces this idea of like, yeah, well, I'm here to stick around for that person, but I also have the wherewithal that that their world doesn't affect mine.
Right.
And so again, I don't think there's a right or wrong approach. I think or a choice, but what I would say is probably more, right, would be at least being aware of what you chose to do.
Yeah. And this is completely, it's funny what you said to bring that up. I forget exactly how you described that, but the Taoist David Way said the exact same thing to me when I asked him, if his family thinks he's crazy. He's like, I don't really care. He's like, I do my own thing. And as I've done this for 30 years, becoming a Taoist monk, he's like, they've been inspired to be as healthy as me, but, I never pushed them to do that. They just saw how it worked for me and followed on their own. And I think that's a great point to make, that we need to focus on our own connection.
And you also have to realize, just the natural sort of progression of being human and, having like relationships and dynamics. And it is, this is probably true for most people, is as they begin to grow and change from whomever they were, like, let's say when they were younger, as they mature, it gets easy to do that as you're developing that new compass point. I mean, that's what it is. You're like changing where your compass is pointing towards as we grow and mature. And it's easier to do that when you are in an environment which supports where you're going. And so it's like, okay, I'm building this muscle, and like, I'm around like-minded people, or I'm in like a really stress-free environment. And so it's easy to like step into that role. And then when we go back to, these foundational dynamics, whether that be between family members or like childhood or all of these different, triggers, like then like, the rubber meets the road. You're like, fuck, I was doing so good when I'm like in my special space, but like when I go and I talk to my family, like, I find myself going back to like who I once was. There ain't nothing wrong with that. That, like, when you recognize that, And just the friend who you were just describing, he's been on his Taoist path for 30 years. And he's like, I'm just me being me. And like, I don't care about the other people. Probably when he was like at year 1, it wasn't as easy to say that as it was in year 30. Like these are kind of muscles that we are developing. And so when we recognize that, you can be a little bit easier on yourself. That's why, like, you observe, you're like, okay, I can see that. I can recognize things, but you don't necessarily beat yourself up because, you're doing the best you can.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder now, as it pertains to rewilding our consciousness, because I'm noticing as I change my life and move into this sphere where I'm kind of creating my own schedule, creating what I do to get paid, and that's exciting. It's fun. It's infective, infectious. People feel the joy there. But, when we rewild our consciousness, is that solo? Is that something you can do with a partner or with a family member? Like, take me through the steps there? Because this is, I'm sure it's not new to me, but I have a feeling that there's going to be some new things.
I'm excited that you're using the phrase rewilding consciousness, because I've mentioned that before, but I don't want to go there quite yet, because I want to hear how the remainder of like you and your lady sleeping under the moon, like anything else, like outside of like the experience with your friend, like did anything else like happen during that time? Did you notice anything? Did anything go on? What events?
I'm trying to go through the roll of memories right now to really think about it. No, other than feeling blinded when we were sleeping inside and then coming outside in the morning and just being hit with this light. So it was necessary for my health to go outside. My eyes were so dilated. I didn't understand if it was the amount of screen time I had or if it was just sleeping indoors as opposed to outdoors. But yeah, there's something about sleeping outside in a tent that puts you in touch with the rhythm of the earth. It's really like last week when we did our first episode, I woke up like 15 minutes before we had done that because I had slept inside that day. And for a month or so, I'd been waking up with the sun, because when you're sleeping outside, the sun comes out and heats you up real fast and you wake up, So no, it's really, my whole life I've spent, sleeping inside, and to have this opportunity to sleep in my grandmother's backyard, as crazy as that sounds, it's been really, really great in a lot of ways to get in touch with the cycles of the earth and what's going on. And now we're working on, getting into that energy in order to manifest that next place to live, you know, because we wouldn't want to be sleeping in the tent past October, that's for sure.
Yeah, definitely so. And you know, you're just indicating like how quickly, how quickly it is that we realign or we rewild ourselves outside of, you know, false reality. And false reality is just part of life. Like, there's nothing wrong with false reality. If you're human, you're going to live in false realities, but like becoming aware of that. So like, you know, living in a cube box room, you know, that's a false reality. I live in a cube box room. That's where I sleep the most times. But you're saying like how quickly you're noticing like these kind of changes, and like both like in kind of like a consciousness psychological way, but then also in like a very practical way. It's like, oh, I'm waking up because the sun's up, and like, that's just it's that simple. And so it's that's an interesting point. But can I bring up my experience with the full moon this past couple of days?
Please, I'm sure it's far more interesting than mine.
All right. So where to begin with this? So by no means am I an expert of the skies, like an astronomer who can like point out all of the different constellations and all of that sort of stuff. Like, I mean, I've got like a general knowledge, like most people do. Like, I can point out the Big Dipper, and I know like Orion's Belt, but for the most part, like, you know, that isn't something which I would say like I'm particularly adept. That's not like a deep part of my knowledge. And I just mean that like generally, like over my adult life. And, you know, over the past probably like 4 or 5 years, I've earned my keep more through astrological services than anything else. You know, I've kind of like become an astrologer, a professional astrologer. I just say that because, you know, I get paid for that. And so understanding the heavens became like part of my reality on a much, much deeper level over these past couple of years, because, you know, before I've always like kind of like studied my own chart and stuff like that. But it changes when you start doing it, you know, spending more time on other people's charts than your own. So the point I'm trying to make is over the last 5 years, I've really gotten into the heavens. And one of the things I notice is like, you know, some people who are like into astrology, they take it just purely as an abstract, like, oh, my natal moon is in Pisces, and that means this, and blah 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 blah, and they stick with ideas per se. And just my nature is I'm very, very in certain ways, I can be very, very concrete. You know, I like physical things, material things. I like, you know, that realm. Like, I like to measure things. And so, as I've learned more and more of astrology and have really ingrained my consciousness deeper and deeper with that, it was all in like this abstract level, like, you know, this means this, and, you know, and looking at charts, which, you know, you could print out. But at the same time as this is happening, because I do have this kind of concrete sort of way about me, I want to understand what it means. Like, you know, what is this natal chart a symbol of? Like, what are these planets? Like, where are they in the sky? Like, can I see them? All this sort of stuff. This is the reason why I built the starboard, is because I wanted like the idea at first, just like the idea of astrology to become like more tangible. Like, I didn't quite get a lot of these concepts. And so through the use of the starboard, it's become like, okay, well, what are the like mechanisms, or what is actually happening in the sky, at least in terms of what we can see. So all that being said, like, really over the past couple of years, I've become more and more interested in being able to like look in the sky, understand like how the abstract idea of like what it says the chart of the sky is at any given time, and translating that not so much in terms of meaning, but translating that also into like what can I see? How does that line up? Is it one the same? And I call that objective astrology. So all of that was just the preface of where I'm going for this weekend. So, so what has been really, really friggin' cool, and really the past year had what I just described to you, like turning like astrology, like more, or going more and more away from it as an abstract and more as a concrete understanding of this environment which we experience life in. This past year it's just been getting like stronger and stronger, more concrete. You know, I'm developing that muscle within myself. I talked to you a little bit about like, you know, developing muscles with the family. Like, you know, this is me developing muscles with understanding what the sky is. And so, what has been, really what is the point of focus of probably like 9 months right now is seeing Jupiter and Saturn in the sky.
Mm.
Like, do you look and can you identify like where Jupiter and Saturn are?
No, I mean, synchronistically, I was just talking about that last night. I was live on Fringe FM with Joe Roop, and we were talking about Saturn and Jupiter and some of the things going on there. But I remember last time we were in Lancaster with you, or well, Millersville, we were looking for, I think it was Saturn, right? We looked with the high-powered camera there.
Okay. Were we able to see it?
I think so. I don't know if we were 100% sure that we were looking at Saturn, but that was the intention. And then
yeah, we definitely were. We definitely were. So prior to I don't know, like 9 months ago, maybe a year ago, I held in my mind, like, you know, the story I told myself in my mind was, like, you need to have a telescope to see Jupiter, and you need to have a telescope to see Saturn, and maybe you could see Mars. And I imagine like Mars would be so faint. Mars would be so faint that, you know, it would be like one of those like really distant stars or something like that. Like that's how I picture it in my mind. Like, because a lot of this, that's what I mean, like abstracts. We have an idea like, oh, this is where Mars is. And you picture like, oh, well, can I see it? Can I actually see it or what have you? And I had the assumption, I was holding the assumption that these things were like really far away. But that's not true at friggin' all. You know, like once you know where they are, it's like they are of the same magnitude of like just any other star. Once you begin to recognize it, like that's when this, at least for me, the movement from looking at a chart and that being just an abstract idea, you know, me being able to say like, oh, there's a symbol of Saturn, and Saturn is in Aries, and, you know, I have a concept in my mind of what that means. You know, that's an abstract versus going outside and you're like, oh, okay, right there, that's Saturn. You know, that there's a difference. Something changes in your perception, in your consciousness. You're seeing it in a different way. It's no longer just like an idea. It's like now I can identify it. There's still a question like, what the hell is Saturn? Like, you know, I can't answer that question, but at least I can identify it not on a piece of paper, but with my own eyes. So for this past year, really it began in December of last year, moving towards the December of last year. So it was last fall, like as I knew that there was going to be this great conjunction, which is when Saturn and Jupiter are in the exact same place in space, like I started following it. Like someone needed to use one of the star finder apps on their phone, and I was able to know for certain. Like I used to look at things and I'd be like, intuitively, I think that's something, but I wanted something more concrete. So I was able to concretely be able to identify these things. And then so over a couple of months, like of last fall, you could begin to see Saturn and Jupiter. They were getting closer and closer and closer in the night sky until they were eventually what would be called conjunct. They were in the same place, and that's known as the Great Conjunction. And then that happened right around the winter solstice of last year. And then ever since then, they've been moving further apart from one another. And that's what I've been kind of observing. And they don't move like fast, but like over a period of time, you could see the gap between the two gets like wider and wider. So all that said, and then what's also cool is you begin to see like Jupiter and Saturn, when you're looking at them, they appear like from our perspective to be like, I don't know, like let's say right now like an inch and a half apart from one another. You can see Jupiter, which is brighter than Saturn, and then like an inch and a half to the right is Saturn, and you could see them in that relationship an inch and a half apart. Like you look at the sky, like let's say at like 9 o'clock, and it's you can see where they are, and you come back and you look like maybe at midnight or something. You can see that shifted. You can see how the night sky moves across on a given evening. And that's been really cool. And I've been watching that and just like, just allowing myself to become aware. So all that being said, this is the longest friggin' preface in the world, but I kind of like it. I hope you're enjoying the story. So I've been doing that for about a year, and it just like, it just tickles me. Like Saturn and Jupiter are, sometimes you could see Venus, sometimes you could see Mars, but right now, like Saturn and Jupiter are always visible in the night sky, and they're easy to identify. And so I do, and this, like, once a week, Jenny and I will do the movement on the starboard, and we just move we have stones which mark the position of the planets, and each week we update where those changes have been. Like, you can find that in now, like in a variety of just like websites will tell you that. And then we write in a book, and then we go and we move the chart. We move the stones that represent the planet on the starboard. Mm-hmm. And what always dictates when we do that movement is when the moon hits a different point in its cycle. New moon, first quarter, full moon, third quarter, and then new moon again. And so, which is basically about a week, a week goes. So it's like you begin by doing this. Like what I've noticed is I begin to get a sense of the speed and the rhythm of the planets and where they are. So the starboard has been done like primarily like driven by the moon, and then I've been watching Saturn and Jupiter, and then just in the past 2 weeks, the moon has been in the same part of the heavens as, like, I can see where Saturn and Jupiter are. It does that every once a month. That's the moon goes around. So now I'm watching the, not just like I can go in the starboard and see like this is where Jupiter and Saturn are, and then this is where and look at the sky and be like, okay, it's in the same proportion on the starboard as I'm seeing in the heavens, and that's so friggin' cool. And now the moon's in play. And now I'm like, oh, look, like, on the starboard, it says that the moon is going to be like right by Jupiter. And I look up in the sky that night and I'm like, yeah, the moon really is right by Jupiter. And it's like there's this connection which is happening inside of me. Like on a certain level, you're like, well, what's the big friggin' deal? It's always been there. But it's like I've been bringing awareness to it. So all of that's the end of the preface, okay? So this is what I wanted to tell you. I told you all of that to really illustrate this point of how, like, I've been like watching the stars, watching the planets, and like doing like the starboard sort of thing, and I'm becoming just more and more aware and connected of these movements. And I kind of know where the positions are. Like I know where in the sky everything's like, when you came down in when we looked through the high powered camera, like there was still that question I had. Like, I think that's Saturn, I think that's Jupiter, but I don't have those questions anymore because I've established that muscle. I'm very comfortable now with what I'm looking at, or at least of these two things. So all of that being said, like I know exactly where, and really over the past 2 weeks, where the moon has been relative to Saturn and Jupiter. And so now let me go and paint this picture for you. So you can imagine there's this like line segment, if you will, of Jupiter and Saturn, and all the planets go on more or less the same. You can imagine it like a racetrack. They're on the same racetrack that goes around the sky. So you see all the planets go around the same line, and that's called the ecliptic. And the moon goes around the ecliptic too. The moon, from where I am on Earth relative to all this sort of stuff, like the moon is slightly below where Jupiter and Saturn would be, that line. And when I say slightly below, like from my perception, it looks like it's like maybe like a half inch below. Like if you were to trace these two lines of like what Saturn and Jupiter do when they move across the sky, and the tracing the line which the moon does. So I've been watching this for 2 weeks. All right. I've been watching this for 2 weeks. I know where it is. I think I got all this stuff all figured out. I'm like, wow, I'm really getting it on a different level. So all that being said, I walk out last night and I look at the moon. And I just told you, I've been like paying attention to positions and like, all this sort of stuff. And the moon, which is normally, like, as I described, like half an inch below the line which Saturn and Jupiter, which is basically the same line, it's the same ecliptic, it's now about 5 inches above it. Like now I have to crane my neck, like totally looking up at the sky. And I'm like, what is causing that to happen? Is that normal? Does it change that much in a given day, in a 24-hour cycle? How come I haven't seen that before? So that there is my full moon story. Like, I've got all sorts of like ideas of what might be causing it, but I'm suddenly realizing the understanding the movement of the heavens in a way which I didn't before. I've been studying the moon and the stars and the heavens for like years and years and years, and I've never had any awareness or consciousness on what I'm just describing right now. So I thought that was kind of cool. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. You're bringing to mind a lot of things that I've been thinking about. Now that you pointed out, I mean, I've been looking at the moon from the same position for the past 2 weeks, and I've seen, exactly what you just described. Last night, the moon was at least 3-4 inches, it seems, from my perspective. I just stuck my hand out, 2-3 inches higher in the sky. And the clouds were moving a lot faster. That's what we noticed last night. But yeah, it was, we took some pictures too that, with this new camera came out kind of interesting. They have night mode.
So you noticed the same thing, which I was just
only
describing.
After you pointed it out,
right?
I'm starting to see like, because I do remember it rising and coming across the sky, and the trees were sort of obstructing it. And then last night, I was out there 2 a.m, right before I went to bed. Stayed up late to be on Fringe FM, and the moon was not obscured by the tree like it was the night before. So that's where I'm kind of like, okay, maybe.
Right. So what you're saying is you need to have points of reference. That's one of the things which is so important when looking at the sky. Like I've been really kind of like, and I'll show you these slides I've been making, like it's for this presentation I'm working on, but like really trying to like deconstruct I used this word earlier in our conversation, like the mechanism, like what's actually like moving and happening, because most of us, like, yeah, we might look up at the sky, but we don't study it the way maybe it once was. Maybe astronomers, and I'd love to talk to someone who's really, really familiar. But here's the thing of where I want to go with this. Like once you understand these points of reference, like something solid, like my Jupiter and Saturn was my point of reference. Your tree was your point of reference. It could just be like the angle of your neck, if you can remember that. But so like the whole sort of flat Earth sort of movement, right? I think that you and I we may share a similar perspective, which is that may be an accurate description of Earth. And it probably shouldn't come as a surprise because we've been lied to our entire lives. So there should be, of course, like, everything is at least potentially like a complete lie in terms of how we're supposed to picture what our experience is. So that's kind of like what I think about flat Earth, but because it's such a like heated place of like divisiveness, like that to me is my indication. Like I don't want to put too much of my energy into that because I think there's something else afoot going on. But I'm not surprised at all. Like if that in fact is an actual description of what our experience is. So all that being said, like I tend to go by the model or the mechanism of what we've been told of what spaces or what the solar system is, like, you know, how like the moon goes around the earth and like the earth goes around the sun and all that sort of stuff. Like I use that as my point of reference, but I'm also like, this could all be completely like bullshit. Like that is an inaccurate description. Like we can, that is not what is happening. And I don't know for certain, but I use like, you know, the lowest common denominator just because it's a point of reference. So all of that being said, and then like even going to the furthest point, which is like, you know, like how accurate is something like the Truman Show? Is it not metaphorical? Like, is it literal? Like, is it literally like, you know, that is how false it is. Like when we look up at the sky, like, I don't know, that's above my pay grade, but I'm certainly open to those ideas. So when I saw that moon, and I'm like, from the way I understand, from what I've been taught of like what the moon does, like, yeah, maybe the moon changes a little bit, but how could the moon have changed so much on its supposed trajectory going around the Earth? Like, how did it go from like being being half an inch beneath the line of Jupiter and Saturn to now being like 4 inches above it?
Yeah. Well,
and like, I don't have an answer to it, but I certainly am like, you know, this is not real, or like the story which we're being told of what the reality is. You know, this kind of goes into not exactly like the whole Crow 77 stuff, but like I remember when I first saw that, I forget what it's called, like the wave that goes across the moon, and when you first see that, and you're like, what are we actually looking at? What can I trust? And so I had. I'm not going to a conclusion with this. I don't have a conclusion, but what the closest thing to a conclusion I can have is like, in a way, my world, my perception or model of my reality of what I think we're experiencing, living life on Earth with the heavens above us. Like, you know, a huge like monkey wrench was thrown into that last night.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. As you're describing this, and you mentioned the racetrack, you know, in the sky, it brought to mind this image that I saw in a book called Athanasius Kircher, A Renaissance Man and the Quest for Lost Knowledge. And this is someone who I think, confusedly brought up to you when you were telling me about Johann Kelp or someone like that. But this guy was a Jesuit sort of priest, astronomer, that type of alchemist in the 17th century, I think. And he makes the remark that the moon's irregularity makes it impossible to achieve the accuracy of solar measurements. And that's on the page that I flipped to when you brought that image to mind of this sort of dragon, that all of the bodies of the planets rest on the body of this dragon, and you can see, or snake, you can see this dragon snake sort of tailing through the zodiac in a racetrack kind of way across the sky in this image from the 14th century. And then there's another, well, these are wood cuttings, but either way. So yeah, you're bringing to mind this image, and then I flip to the page, and this guy Kircher, who spent a lot of time looking at the stars, has the same idea of the moon. Like, this thing's too irregular to even accurately predict, the same way we can with the sun.
And then just like maybe like what I just described, like, you know, that's always been the case, but here I am, even this guy who, like, you know, he plays with the moon and the sun and the stars and the heavens and in like a thoughtful, conscious way, but still, if this is like based upon what that guy just said with the passage which you just read about, like, you know, the moon is so confusing. Like, maybe what I just described has been, you know, that's just the way it's always been, and people have always noticed that. But we are so disconnected. You know, we may understand, you know. You and I have talked about the moon before, and we've talked about the moon in calendars and stuff like that. And I would say that in the continuum, or the bell curve of the population for like how much people think or aware of the moon, like, you know, we're probably in the top 10% just by doing that, just by having these sort of conversations. Like, most people don't pay any attention to it at all. And so, this idea of even in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. You know, it's like we're becoming more and more aware of our environment, and as we become aware of what we're seeing, you know, as we're moving away from a false reality. So the false reality would be just how these concepts we've been holding in our head of the moon. And I'm not saying like it being false being accurate or not accurate. What I mean false reality meaning we're just holding concepts. Like, you know, I'm looking at someone's astrological chart and I'm looking at it as just like a printout on a piece of paper, as opposed to like understanding it as an actual thing up in the sky. As for me, and maybe for you and other people, and I think maybe this is going on a lot right now, as we move outside of these false realities, just thinking about stuff we're around all the time on the conceptual level, and then we're beginning to understand it differently by actually interacting with it on, like in this example, like, you know, looking at it with my eyes as opposed to about like reading its positioning in like a website. We become more aligned in consciousness to what things are as they actually are, baseline reality, versus this kind of like false reality. And I think it happens quickly, like almost in the same way as you described, like sleeping out on the earth versus sleeping in like, you know, a box room. And so the reason why I'm kind of like spilling this in such detail, or spelling it out in such detail, is because you brought up that phrase, rewilding consciousness. And this is what I'm talking about. This is what rewilding consciousness means. And rewilding consciousness is recognizing like, whoa, the way I understood like my surroundings, you know, in this example, like the moon and its position in the sky and its phases, I am deconstructing what I thought I knew it was, you know, from whether not paying attention to it at all, or like maybe just paying attention to it as a concept, and then like becoming familiar with it as it actually is, and then just allowing that to grow. And that is the rewilding process in this particular instance. And like to do that purposefully, to say like, you know what, I recognize that I've been born into a false reality. All realities are false realities. You know, all cultures that humans create are like a couple degrees, a lot or a little of degrees off of like the actual baseline reality. To purposefully, and particularly now as the false reality one is collapsing for the bringing in of another one, bringing consciousness, applying it outside of the false reality, and allowing it to take root and grow where it's going to grow. That is the rewilding of consciousness, which I was making reference to.
Yeah. Wow. It's, I think it's something that people are all aware of on an intuitive level. You know, we need to get back to our connection with Mother Earth, you know, and to put it in those terms of rewilding, I think it's brilliant. I think a lot of people are, you know, they're just unconsciously seeking that, you know, and you hear everything about off the grid and self-sustainable community. And, you know, I was kind of urged right now as you were describing that to open this book that I had purchased recently, Investigating the Connecticut Mystery. And it talks about, on the first page, the rediscovery of the New World. And the very core of this vision is the recognition that each person is responsible for his or her own destiny. You know, yada, yada, yada. My point being, you know, you've studied this a lot, the whole colonial experiment and everything that went into that, but in a kind of new way. Like, we all have that opportunity to create our own reality here now with this land that's been, you know, all land. It's just all land, you know. I mean, we have so much, I forget the word that we used previously when talking about this, but matrix consciousness telling us what is and what isn't, all these labels for what is and what isn't. And at the end of the day, the energy of rewilding is what we're all really looking for. I mean, that's kind of, I don't know, not saying much other than I agree with you, Mike. But
well,
yeah.
I would say that's always been a truth. Like, you know, all times, all cultures are to a certain degree a false reality. You know, there's no such thing. There's no authentic one spoken language. You know, so any spoken language, that's a false reality. You know, me using the sounds that sound like apple to describe that thing that grows off certain trees that you can eat, and you don't want to eat the seeds, you know, that there's a degree of false reality there. I'm not saying like it doesn't hold purpose, like, because when I say apple, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But there is, in every time and culture, there is the opportunity for an individual to say like, oh, wait a minute, all of this stuff which I assume to be like true actually isn't true. It's just a subjective truth. And then when you begin to like step away from that, deconstruct that, however that, you know, the infinite ways one can do that, you know, a whole new world opens up to them. Like, you know, you could even say that's part of like, you know, the mystic's experience, or you could even say that's the hero's journey as you go through that within your own ego or what have you. Like, that's always been the case. But what is happening right now on Earth, I'm going to go, you know, I go out on a limb and I'll say, from everything I know from my own lifetime experiences and everything which I know from like people who've been alive during my lifetime. So that'd be like parents and grandparents, and everything which, and the reason I say that as opposed to history, because, you know, history should always be questioned as well, but there hasn't been anything like this, like what's going on right now. Like, and so what we're describing, this kind of like, you know, the breaking down of like a false reality and rewilding consciousness, like, which means like going out of a false reality, going to something more authentically true to then go and have a new reality. Like, that has always been a nice thing, but now it is it's a recipe or a technique which is going to be a requirement, I think, for navigating what is going to be unfolding before us. I want to kind of like switch gears a little bit right now, because I think this is at least where my mind goes, because we're talking a lot about the moon, right? And we're recognizing that everything that we think we know is at least questionable. Like, I'm not necessarily going to go and say everything that we know is wrong, but I'm saying that everything that we know should at least be questioned. So you and I have been talking a lot about the moon, right?
Right.
And so what do you know about like the moon as a satellite of Saturn?
Wow. Well, so my thought on the, because I think you're getting at the origin of the moon. What I've heard.
Well, no. I'm getting at the different ideas of what the moon is. Okay. I got no idea what the origin of the moon is.
Oh, okay.
I'm talking about ideas. Right. So what do you know about that as an idea?
Not much. All I've heard is that the moon was like a byproduct of a collision with an old planet that created the, you know, asteroid belt and Mars and the moon. And then we have, because there's ancient stories that the moon wasn't in the sky a long time ago. So take that for what you will, but maybe that's not where you're going with it.
Well, what I'm trying to go at is, so exactly, like, so I know that there are a variety of cultures, or no, this is what I know. I know that I have read that there have been a variety of cultures who tell tales of time before the moon.
Right.
Like, you know, that has been put out there as an idea. I know that there are other cultures that don't have those stories. I know that I've been told that if there was no moon, there'd be no tides. And if there are no tides, there'd be no life on Earth, or at least the type of life that exists right now. I know that the Earth, I've been told that the moon was formed by something hitting the Earth, like an asteroid hitting the Earth, and a big chunk of Earth like shot off and eventually became the moon. I've been told that the moon is incredibly different than every other moon in the solar system in terms of its size relative to the planet and other different things. We get all these anomalies of the moon. We always see the same side. All of the weird things which we described before, like it changes in the its position in the sky. I also know that I want to say the first time I ever heard it was probably from like David Icke, from that type of line where it talks about how the moon is actually a artificial satellite which is connected to the planet Saturn, and Saturn and Moon, they both are on a fractal cycle of one another. The Saturn has a 29-year cycle or orbit. It's going to be in the same place in the heavens every 29 years. And then the Moon more or less has a 29-day cycle, which goes from new moon to new moon. So like there is a connection there. I'll say that, the idea that the moon is this false satellite, which has been used to like control the thoughts of and imprison humanity based upon like archonic forces that are using satellites rings or Saturn's rings as a satellite. I know that that's a story.
Right.
I also know that the moon has served as a source of inspiration and of wonder and awe for almost every culture and almost every single person I've met. Also know that, there's all of these like lunatic and like werewolf mythologies of like the dangers of the moon. So the point I'm trying to make right now is there's a whole bunch of stuff which is out there just about the moon in general, like a whole bunch of stories. And to be quite honest, you're not going to be able to really prove any one of those, or at least I can't.
I think that's a very fair point. I think, yeah, it's for the most part, I don't want to say subjective, but it's very intimate, I would say. It's kind of...
Well, I'll say this. There's a lot of blind spots.
Okay.
We can't see everything. It's like, I'm like, okay, well, this comes from a trusted source, or this comes from a trusted source. What's all the trusted source?
We're told...
And I'm not saying that there's a problem with that. I'm just like, I'm recognizing it as it is.
Right. Well, we're told that we only see one side of it. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, that would be one of the anomalies. I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing you, Mark. Could you maybe be a little bit closer to the microphone?
Yeah, sorry. I said, did you hear everything I said just then?
Yeah, about like how you only see one side. Exactly. Like, it's the moon is undoubtedly anomalous. And so the reason I'm bringing all this up is because you and I both have maybe like, I don't want to say, I'm not going to use the word worship, but we have put in a high degree of consciousness and awareness and intention between ourselves and the relationship, a relationship between ourselves and the moon. Just the very fact that we're aware of it, all this sort of stuff. And at the end of the day, like you could probably, like you could make an argument. I can make an argument. You can make an argument that like, hey man, maybe the moon isn't something you want to go and put your that much consciousness to. Like maybe it is like this brainwashing thing being used from Saturn. We've been talking a lot about Saturn. These are blind spots. We don't know for certain. And so the reason I'm bringing this up, one is because it's like, if you want to be intellectually honest with yourself, you got to, sometimes like bring things, you got to play your own devil's advocate. But I mentioned about like, now is the time to, with great purpose, like deconstruct our understanding of a lot of things we've always taken for granted, and going back to the most natural or baseline reality. And I'm saying, like, I think this is the way I see it, at least, or the way I'm approaching. Like, this is air quotes when I say strategy, but for a strategy for moving through this particularly unusual time as a human on Earth. But then, do we want to jump? Do we jump from the fire or from the frying pan into the fire? Okay, well, the moon is the one that's causing all of this, all of these control problems to begin with. Like, you're just going straight to the source of it. So I think that is an interesting and valid sort of idea that at least needs to be thought of. And I want to tell you like the way I think about that, or at least how I approach that. We brought this up before, and it is, you come back to a fundamental philosophical question. There's not an answer. There's not a correct answer to this question. There is a personal, as you say, a personal answer to this question, and is the universe inherently a friendly or a dangerous place?
Yeah.
And I choose that it's friendly because I can't tell you I understand, I can intellectually understand the differences between the different stories of what the moon is and is not. But because I can't, I'm going to have to vote. I'm going to have to choose which one I'm going to go with. Either like, oh no, the moon is dangerous. The moon is dangerous. And that is not something I want to align myself more deeply with because, it's a Saturnian mind control satellite. That could be one choice. Or the moon is something which is outside of the matrix and it's something which I want to align to. That's an individual question. And it's ultimately going to come down to like what you choose in terms of what do you trust and how do you see the bigger picture of the higher level orchestrating mechanisms behind this experience.
Well, I will say, the feminine aspect to it all makes me think that there might be something inherent to us as humans that connects us to the moon for better or worse. I think that might be the feminine perspective to judge, maybe not in this lifetime for me, but I think without that one aspect, you're bringing to mind the alpha predator, alpha nurturer, and the third that I kind of thought of, and Tara helped me we both jumped this idea back and forth, alpha protector. I feel like that might be another aspect to explore, but I think that dynamic is true in our symbiotic environment. You see, things have this relationship between life and death that don't always match what we would consider, moral or, what cultures consider the right thing to do. It's that matrix subjective level that maybe that's not, what is wild, what is natural, bring it back to rewilding, or at least my interpretation of it. But, what are we to trust when it comes to stories about the moon being a satellite or being, part of Saturn? I mean, yeah, that's deep. I kind of go back to like cultural experience, and maybe that's flawed. I don't know.
Well, I agree with you completely. Like, I don't think there is a correct answer to this question. I think what is valuable is asking the question and understanding why it is that we choose one or the other. If you're choosing to choose at all, which if you're going to be aware, you're going to have some degree of choice. And that to me is, at least why you're choosing something, or why you made your decision. And I think that it is, in my opinion, like it is both like understanding like the cultural implications, and then also like your personal experience. Like, if you start like aligning yourself to the moon, and then suddenly like demons start like showing up in your basement, and then you can see a correlation with them. Maybe you don't want to do the moon. Maybe all of that, like that Saturnian satanic sort of thing, maybe that is accurate. But to me, like that, is it a dangerous place or is it a friendly place or a dangerous place? The universe, like that, just like what you said, that goes down to, if we're going to duality, it is this like, apex predator versus apex nurturer in terms of like, what at least, I don't want to say like what's running the show. What is the consciousness? What is the perception of how you're going to go through reality that you choose to subscribe to? And I would even say that when you said the apex protector, which I friggin' love, that would be the almost like the blending between the two. It's almost a blending between the two. And I would say we predominantly in our modern culture are worshipers or followers of an apex predator mindset, survival of the fittest, scarcity. You're fighting for all resources. Everything is a battle. They're always, where are you in the pecking order? All of that, that is one way of seeing things. And you can make a very, very valid argument that like, there's a truth to that. Like, you do see lions eat gazelles. Like that is true. But then there's also like the apex nurture, which is the opposite, which is like, this is a world of abundance. This is a world where everything is provided and you don't have to worry. It's Edenic, it's like as in Eden. And so, you can be like, oh, it's this or it's that. For me, and I'll just tell you what my opinion is, or at least what my opinion is as of now, yes, that the death process is part of experiential in life. That's what the new moon, going from full moon to new moon as the moon dies. That's what it is. Like there is death, but then it rebirths again. And so be like, oh, it's just like going back and forth. It's this yin and the yang. But I'll say the very fact that we exist is indicative of the fact that this is a primarily, if it's going to be 49%, this is a nurturing environment. Because if that was the case, then the environment would not exist. Right. There'd be nothing.
Right. And I love that yin and yang duality is sort of the theme in this, because this was a Pisces moon. And one thing that I, Pisces full moon, one thing that I noticed when I was looking at another image in that same book, is when you look at this sort of, I'm sure you've seen this before, Mike. It's a full moon, new moon kind of chart, right? And they show you the circles, and all the circles are in a circle. And when you see the sort of black to white ratio and the way it curves, it looks like yin and yang. And I almost think like maybe that's what inspired whoever designed the yin and yang in the first place, is this new moon to full moon balance. But yeah, maybe that's a little off course from what we were talking about.
You know what? I don't think I've ever thought about, like, I know the chart you're talking about, and I work with that a lot, because I think that the lunar cycle is a really, really like easy way to understand cycles of how life seemingly happens, on the Earth experience. And, I know the yin and the yang, but I never even thought about them. Like, they're saying the same thing, but you're 100% right. And I'll go one step further. The white circle on the black side of or the yin side, the dark side of the yin yang, that's a full moon. And when you've got the dark circle in the light side, that's the new moon. And then all of the different sizes that you see along that split, like, yeah, that shows you the different types, the movements throughout the going from one extreme to the other.
Beautiful.
It's a real interesting. I mean, the best symbols, in my opinion, the most potent symbols, and define potent however you want to, they have embedded in them an objective truth. Like, I could go and do any sort of squiggle and do whatever I want. And then through intention and purpose, I can align my mind to go and say that this squiggle has this meaning. And when I see this squiggle, it means this. And I could eventually, like, even create a a conditioned response to that symbol. But if the symbol is just totally like, random, like, yes, you can go and make those connections and it becomes real that that symbol does equal that, and it's real because you have a conditioned response. But if you have a symbol which has embedded in its actual design, and now when I say symbol, I don't mean this from a conceptual level. I mean like an actual like drawing, a symbol, a sigil. When there is something authentically real within it, well, then it becomes even more, more potent. And that's exactly what the yin yang would be if, that is in case the thing, it being a reverence to the lunar cycle, if not even a teaching tool of the lunar cycle.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I ordered 2 t-shirts in the mail. One of them had a yin yang on it, and the other one was Susquehanna Alchemy. And
man,
one of them arrived near the new moon, and the other one arrived on the full moon. Look at that. But yeah,
did you get your Susquehanna Alchemy shirt?
I got my Susquehanna Alchemy shirt. Which
one did you get?
I got a green. It was green with the like purple font. It's just
the disco one.
The disco one, yes.
What do you think of it? What do you think of the color?
Love it.
Those colors, those 2 colors which you have, I have it in the light blue one. That's my favorite t-shirt. But in that green one, like, those are wild. That's a bold shirt, my friend. Thank you very much for the support.
No problem. Tara chose it, and I got the medium so we both could wear it. And she's been wearing it. But yeah, and the other shirt
does it fit like a belly shirt on you?
No, it's just long enough. It's nice. I didn't even think of that.
I'm picturing you like in this like too small a shirt.
Oh yeah, no, I've been there for sure. Yeah, no, this other shirt that I got, I ordered it from Spreadshirt, I think, for my show, because I'm trying to find like a nice design that I can do for my podcast, to get some merch out there. And I got a horizontal yin yang I put on the front of it. Because, they let you kind of do the basic design, little workshop, and make your own t-shirt. So it was just interesting that meaning. And now as you're saying that, I'm like, well, a horizontal yin yang kind of implies that you're looking at these 2 spheres on a horizon, rather than the up-down that you typically see a yin yang. But I don't know if that's true. That might just be what we see here in the West when we see yin yangs. Maybe, in the East, the traditional yin yang is supposed to be oriented on a horizontal plane. I think that's another subjective layer to it. But yeah, I think there's so many angles. I wanted to bring up some stuff I learned from this show, Mysterious Universe, and see where that connected, because wow, I've been diving into that show. I don't know if you've listened to them before, but
no, I haven't. Let me go. I want to comment one last thing on the yin yang, and then I want to hear what you got to say.
Cool.
So you were talking about like whether it be horizontal and this is or versus vertical and implications, and then this is where like, we begin to create false reality. But again, like, false reality is part of being human. Like, there's nothing wrong with false reality. So like, if you were to go and say like, wow, when it's on the horizon, this is what it represents, or it represents to me. And it is based upon like a logic, like you understand why it represents that, particularly with a symbol as potent is the yin yang, then it like literally becomes a reality. Like this is how false realities are constructed. They're constructed because this is how all of our human realities are. Like you have something, it has meaning, and then it creates this feedback loop with inside your inner world, and then you go about the outer world looking for those sort of things, and it goes in this loop. So when you create your stories, and when you do it purposefully, and you understand like what you're doing, like, this is the rebuilding of that new world. And what, just using this yin yang as an example, like, because it's easy to envision, once you grasp that concept, like, you can apply that to everything in terms of how you see and interpret it, but you just don't want to fool yourself. you got to walk that middle line between like creating the reality, subscribing to a belief that you choose to have, but then also recognizing like, you know, this is just a story I'm telling myself, but I'm choosing to accept it.
Right. Yeah.
So what was we've got a couple more minutes left. What was the thing you wanted to share from that other podcast?
Well, maybe we can kind of leave this for the next episode. I could just bring it up and maybe you could think about it and we'll talk somewhat about it on the next episode. But
all right. So I'm going to write down my notes. So tell me what it is so that I remember the next time we talk that I can bring it back up. What was it that you want to bring up? What was the show?
So this is Mysterious Universe, and they were talking about a book that describes a journey that a actress and a filmmaker went on to make a movie about a book that it's changed my life profoundly. The Carlos Castaneda's Don Juan Yaqui Way. You know, I read that when I was really young, so instantly I was interested in the podcast. I think maybe if you listen to it, you'll understand a little bit better.
All right, how about this? This will be my homework.
And here, let me just leave. Yes, and let me leave you and everyone listening with this. It's the idea that synchronicities can be manipulated or in some way like moved by, and that same, you know, and I'm wondering maybe this has to do with us creating our, you know, artificial reality, like you're saying, or if there's some kind of maybe the moon or some kind of entities that manipulate synchronicity to lead people astray or, you know, on a different path than they would have gone on, for worse or for better, possibly. I think that's what most people assume about synchronicities, is that they're for the better.
So I'm really excited. I'm excited to have that conversation. If you could go, what I'm going to do is I'm going to listen to that podcast. I'm going to listen to that episode. You're going to send it to me, and maybe you could include a link to that, like in the notes here, so other people who are listening at home can listen to it again or listen to what we're talking about. And then when we meet next week,
beautiful,
let's discuss it.
Beautiful. All right, Mike. Well, this has been.
And there's one more thing. This is what I want to discuss next week. Also, is my instinct right now, and you know, we're going to see if I'm going to say the same thing after I've listened to this episode that you're suggesting. But I want to also talk about you know, that guy who is. Are you familiar with this person who is making videos supposedly from 2027? Of Valencia, Spain, but there are no people in it?
From 2027? No, I haven't heard about this.
This is the wildest thing in the world. So I'm going to send this to you, and I want you to watch that, because my sense is that these two different ideas and storylines are going to complement, or they're going to be a good contrasting point.
Wow.
So I'll give you a video to look at that, and then we'll include that link also in the show's notes. Beautiful.
All right. Thank you for listening to another episode of Your Handbook for the Apocalypse with Uncle Mike and Mystic Mark. Subscribe at Susquehanna Alchemy on YouTube and support the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast while you're at it. Thank you for listening. Mike, you got anything to add?
No, I think you did a great job.
All right.